I'm here with Keitha McEvers, and we want to talk to you about divorce today. So, Keitha, when someone comes to a place where they feel like divorce is the direction that they're going, tell me a little bit why they would need to contact you and at what point.
Yeah, so there's a couple of decisions to be made. Are we going to keep the home? Are we selling the home? And really, we come into play for both of those. But if they're keeping the home, that spouse is almost always going to be required to refinance that mortgage for a couple of reasons. One, to remove the other spouse off of the mortgage so that that's not reporting to their credit anymore or a debt tied to them anymore. Or two, also to pull cash out so that they can actually buy out the spouse and give them their half of equity.
Okay, so as a loan officer, that's not people's first thought. Like, we're gonna get a divorce, we're gonna have to deal with the house at some point. But you know, tell me a little bit about like the timeline on that. At what point do you feel like they need to contact you?
Obviously, they want to get with their attorney first and start that filing process. But honestly, it's so vital to work with a lender before that divorce is finalized. Once they get to the point where they're really kind of talking and they think they know what they're going to do with the home, they need to contact a lender immediately. Because what happens, and we get this a lot, we have people that come in and the divorce is finalized and they have this decision made to have to refinance. But then they find out that they can't actually afford the decision that divorce requires. They can't afford that payment. Or they don't qualify for that mortgage, and then they have a finalized divorce already, and that can get a little complicated.
I gotcha. Well, I mean, I think that there's a huge misconception in the real estate industry that, or outside looking in, that we get to look at really pretty houses and home sales and purchases happen under really exciting circumstances. But once you get in, I have found that our expertise and when you really need somebody in your corner is during those times when it's not an exciting time. Someone has passed away. There's a divorce happening. There's a job transfer that you didn't anticipate. Some sort of relocation, military relocation. Those times that are a little bit sticky for our clients are the times that, and those of us who have that really deep expertise, that's when we need to come to the table for you. So, okay, so if somebody's getting a divorce and it has been finalized, that, you know, husband is keeping the house or wife is keeping the house, and they find out after the fact that they can't afford it. I mean, what do they do?
Yeah, so there's a couple of options there. And again, you know, I always kind of try to tell my clients that, you know, we're here with the intention of providing that information and not legal advice. So I'm not really sure. They would need to get back with their legal counsel if they wanted to consider trying to change that decree, and if that's even an option. However, what I see is clients getting forced to have to sell when they wanted to keep the home. And so that's why we want to prepare beforehand. One of the things that comes into play if they get with us beforehand is maybe they don't qualify. And sometimes I can look at that file and say, okay, you don't qualify, but here's what we could do to make that happen. But because of the way that the assets and the debts were divvied out in the divorce, they may not have that as an option. Like, we could have paid off a few debts and maybe they would have qualified to keep that home now. So if they had that information, and then they could take that back to their attorney and say, hey, I need these debts paid off in order to keep this home, and really have that information to go over with their legal counsel. Sometimes we can kind of prevent those things from happening, or sometimes they do qualify, but that payment is just totally different than what they thought it was going to be. Maybe they need to pay $20,000 to the other spouse as their portion of the equity. So they're doing a cash out refinance. That rate's going to be a little bit higher than a normal refinance. And then on top of that, maybe they bought the home or redid their mortgage in 2020 and the rates were in the 2s. And now we're in the 6s or 7s.
That's going to change your payment
massively.
Substantially. Yeah. That's a totally different transaction.
People come in and they're in shock and they had no clue the payment was going to jump up by $800 and something for giving their spouse $20,000. But it's not just the $20,000, it's the interest rate. And there's just so many things that go into play. If they would have had that information prior to, that's going to be a lot more helpful. And then they can go over that information with their legal counsel. Or if it's after the fact, then obviously we have a lot of solutions. We can do buy downs. We can definitely work with them and help them, but it's just gonna be a little bit better if they had the information up front.
I mean, I think, this is something that people in most industries will say over and over again. The earlier that you involve us in those decisions, the better we can help you plan. And I mean, we see it I know you see it all the time. Like, people don't call you until they're ready to actually write an offer on a property and they want that pre-qual right then. Or people don't call me until they're ready for me to open a door for them. But the real estate process starts months, sometimes years before. And if we can just shift people's mindsets to us being consultants and preparing them and giving them things to think about. I mean, like, I just think if somebody would call you towards the beginning and say, this is what we think we want to do, what does that actually look like on paper? I know one time I did a divorce where the spouses had agreed to sell the house, and it had already, the judgment had already been finalized and everything. So they were supposed to sell the house and split the proceeds 50-50, but the wife owed too much, and she had switched attorneys a couple of times, and so she owed more than 50% in attorney's fees, and that was on liens on the house, and so they couldn't sell the house. The husband ended up having to keep it, and they had to go back and redo their judgment, and it was a huge mess. But they weren't able to sell it because there were so many liens on the property. She was going to have to come out of pocket to pay those liens, and she didn't have that money to do that. So because they didn't talk to somebody before they went before the judge. So, and I think this is a great resource for attorneys too. So if you are a divorce attorney and you want a real estate professional to weigh in, Keitha is a great consultant for that. If you don't know how that's going to work out.
I work with a lot of divorce attorneys actually, and it's been really great for the client. It's great for the attorney. We are an asset, and we don't care. Sometimes those things take 6 months, a year, and that's fine. But we communicate, and we over communicate with those attorneys and let them know, hey, this is where we're at. This is what the numbers look like. Here's all the information. And sometimes even providing documentation on company letterhead so they can utilize that in court if needed in their negotiations, to make sure that when they're finalizing that decree, that it's actually a feasible or sustainable option, which is really important. I think too, for you, I think that getting with the real estate agent, even if they're going to sell the home, sometimes the market conditions can be, a big difference in what the equity is going to look like. So I think that before they finalize, if they can get with somebody like you or myself and really understand what everything looks like, sometimes they'll go to sell that home, and after the fact, it's not at all what they thought it was going to be. And we run into that a lot, where they're not even keeping the home, but they know what that number is in their head. They're half of their equity. They'll come in, they get pre-qualified to buy their next home, and they'll tell us how much down payment they have, and then they go get that house listed per the divorce decree, and it's not what they thought it was going to be. So just having that information ahead of time is huge.
So huge. And I think, everybody works so well together because I do real estate contracts, I run numbers, I do negotiations. Keitha does mortgages. We're not attorneys, but the attorney also doesn't do real estate or mortgages. So, if everybody is working together to come to a solution, like if we know, okay, this is the objective, this is what the client wants to happen, and we're all working together, then we can get that figured out, and then you're not incurring additional attorney's fees by having to go back and do more things after the fact. So again, not an attorney, know a lot of them.
Same. Work with a lot of them.
But not one, and that was on purpose. So, but anyway, well, Keitha, I really appreciate it. Is there anything else that you feel like people need to know about divorces before we?
I think just really getting the numbers ran, knowing what your house is worth, determining the value, which you're able to do, so that they really know what that market looks like in the current time, what the house could sell for or appraise for, what that payment's going to look like if they want to keep the home, and if they need to do a cash out refinance, or even some other neat options we have so that they can do different types of refinances to access the equity with a lower rate. I just think having the information ahead of time is really helpful.
Perfect. So if someone wanted to call you, and if this rings true for somebody and they want to give you a shout, what phone number do you want them to have?
Yeah, I like to give out my cell phone. They can call in the office all the time, but my cell phone you can call or text at 405-863-4122.
Okay, awesome. And tell us, what is the name of your mortgage company?
Yep, we're Executive Lending Group. We're located in Edmond off of I-35 between Memorial and 33rd Street.
Perfect. Okay. Well, I'm Becky Seda with Seda Real Estate Group at Keller Williams Green Meadow, and we are always happy to have real estate conversations and never too busy for your referrals. Thanks.